manifested, if you will, as in the form of his extensive, as it's thought by the tradition, literary contribution. Um, so he's the legendary compiler of the Eastern Revelation. um, and it's said or it's thought that sometimes poetically, I guess it's said that um, just like the sky contains everything, so the mind of Vyas contains all knowledge. Hmm. So that's an interesting thought, interesting statement in itself, and I think it's important to understand it properly when we say that all knowledge is contained within the manifestation of Vyasa's mind in literary form. It doesn't, I guess I would want to say, it doesn't mean that, for example, everything that we know now today in our world about nature, the nature of the world, the natural world, that all of that is found in the in what may be referred to as the Vedic literature, and therefore we can dismiss any modern thinking or understandings about nature, about human nature. It's all found in the book. After all, his book is a manifestation of his mind. And his mind is like the sky, it contains everything. And in this respect, his book contains all knowledge. So that would not be the way to understand the statement. And I bring it up because many people do think of it along those lines. And that's problematic in terms of taking advantage of Vyasa's contribution, Vyasa and his successors, if you will, up to the present day. Of course, it's true and it's remarkable that we find insights in the sacred texts of the East that in a number of ways correspond with modern, let's say, cosmological perspectives. We don't find that, as far as I know, in other sacred texts from other cultures, other traditions, not to minimize them, but just to underscore this particular unique feature of the work of Vyas or the Eastern Revelation, that, as I say, some modern insights, like say cosmological insights, like the idea of contracting and expanding universes, multiverse rather than a singular universe, cosmic gravity, or what is it called? Quantum gravity, I want to say, but that in many ways is, if you look at it, synonymous with the idea of susupti. These are all interesting, even cyclical time as opposed to linear time. These are all interesting insights, philosophical insights based on interpretations of scientific data that have been, of course, played out in great detail in the modern world. But some of those ideas are found in the Vedic literature. There's in the Bhagavatam, we have a basic atomic theory borrowed from the Nyaya philosophy, integrated into the Bhagavad, that speaks about the idea that nature is made up of atomic particles. I mean, it's very basic in the way it's presented there, but it's interesting that this and other such ideas, as I mentioned, are found there in a more general way. But again, this is not to say that everything that you could possibly want to know is found in the Vedic texts, because again, it's the sky, like mind of Vyas, and as the sky contains everything, so this So do the Vedic literatures. Therefore, just turn to page 108 and you can find the answer to any question. The texts don't work like that. They work on us. Often I've said before that knowledge of this world acquired through the mind, the senses, the intellect is something that we can take and use for our purposes. But the Vedic wisdom is something that has a purpose of its own. It has its own agenda. And if we study it properly, we'll understand we are on its agenda rather than the knowledge there being something that we can put on our agenda to further our illusory, if you will, position in this world. It's not for that purpose. And so what is the knowledge then? The essential knowledge. What does it mean that all knowledge is found there? Again, just for a moment, back to the world. From the Bhagavatam's point of view, of course, this is the mature contribution as thought of Vyas, Srimad Bhagavatam, and there are good reasons to think along those lines. From the Bhagavatam's perspective, when Raj Parikshit asks about the nature of the world, thinking of it as he does, and appropriately so, as a Shakti of Bhagawan, and by knowing about his Shaktis, we can know something about him. That's the question of Parikshit that arises, for example, in the fifth canto. Sukadeva at the onset answers that really I'll tell you what I know, or what is there in the Puranic record about the world, but ultimately it is something that is constantly in flux. It's a transformation of the gunas. And as such, the implication would be there's always something new to be known about it. It's always showing itself, another facet of itself going forward. It's not static, it's dynamic, and that's the material world. It may be static in comparison to the spiritual world, but it's dynamic in and of itself. A nice example in the modern society, of course, is how in classical physics it was thought that the world was pretty much understood until the quantum physics perspective came to light, and it turned to some extent the thinking of modern physicists upside down. Still can't quite figure it out. So it's just like nature showing another aspect of itself to us that we hadn't seen before. And so this is, again, from the Bhagavatam's point of view, well, the world is magic. It's Vishnu's magic, Vishnu Maya, and it has the power to obscure the knowledge that we're actually arriving, the ability to arrive at the knowledge that we're actually seeking, which is, I would say, the knowledge of, well, what are we all looking for? You may go to the moon, but what are you looking for there? Everyone is looking for themselves and the potential of themselves. What am I? What can I be? How much can I be? How full can my life be? I've often said that I is one of the smallest words in the English language, but unlike other small words in the English language, this one is the most used word and the most misunderstood, or the least understood word. Everyone is looking for I. What am I? And what is my potential? It's a small word, but a big pursuit. So you may go to the moon, but did you find yourself there? Did you find the self? That's the question. And self, of course, here means from the literary contribution of Vyas, the Atma, not the conventional sense of self, the psychophysiological material identity or ego. That is a manifestation of the magic of Vishnu Maya that's getting in the way. So there's a kind of knowledge, and it's knowledge of the self, that upon experiencing through the method, if you will, given in the sacred text, that's what they excel in. Knowledge of the self and its source, the self's potential, and the means to realize it. This is the be all and end all of knowledge, in that it's the nature of the experience of the self, of the Atma, and its potential, is that there experiences that there's nothing left that remains to be known. And it brings about weeping, and a kind of, well, to use a Gaudiya term, such symptoms: hair standing on end, weeping, as if the whole search is over. All of my mental, intellectual, physical endeavors for so long, and of course that extends over many lifetimes, but even in this lifetime, it's considerable. All the effort I've put out, it's all over, it's ended. I found myself, and I'm complete in myself if I understand myself, this is from the Gaudiya point of view, in terms of a potential that arises through the most powerful means for knowing myself and my source, which of course is bhakti, that is underscored in the main subject of Vyasa's final and mature work, Srimad Bhagavatam. One of the points that I'm raising here is very interesting, in that while we're talking about the sacred texts and the Bhagavatam in particular, being a means to arrive at perfect knowledge that one could not arrive at on the strength of one's mental, physical, or intellectual prowess alone. And it's absolute knowledge, complete knowledge, perfect knowledge, by which one becomes perfectly happy. Happy to sit without having to do, without having to move, without having to acquire. We're moving because we feel we're incomplete. We need to add something. No need to do so. While the texts, the work of Vyas, contains this kind of absolute knowledge with the capital A, one of the interesting points I'm making here is it's rife with relativity at the same time. That means that this essential message is packaged together with other relative insights, as I said, about the nature of the world. Could look at it this way, could look at it that way. It may show itself in an entirely different way at some point. Our acharyas, we're not the founding acharyas of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, we're well aware, I should say, of this point. Look, for example, at Jiva Goswami's Tattva Sandarbha. The Pramana Kanda, which the Gaudiya epistemology is articulated, how we know what we know. Of course, he says that the senses are imperfect for knowing, and the reason is also imperfect for knowing. Therefore, revelation is the perfect way for knowing. And so while he's speaking about a perfect way of knowing, an absolute knowledge, or a way of knowing that, we should say that we cannot know with the limits of mind and intellect and senses. While he's making that point, at the very same time, the whole Pramana Kanda of the Tattva Sandarbha is also about the relativity of the scripture. It's very interesting. He's making a point about it being absolute and the perfect way of knowing. And at the same time, he's pointing out the relativity of it. For example, he says, well, it's a great body of knowledge, probably the most voluminous body of literature in the world. But given the times, Jiva Goswami speaking about his own time, it's not possible to take advantage directly of the Vedic sounds. Nobody can chant them properly. So he said that's impractical. So there's some relativity to it in that sense. He goes through the different, he goes from the Vedas to, and speaking about the Upanishads, to the Vedanta Sutra. And he says, but, there are many different interpretations of it because it's very terse. The words are, 2 or 3 words. It's a sutra. It's like a shorthand. What's packed in there, it could be unpacked in different ways. And so there are different commentaries and so forth. He comes to the Puranas, and then he dismisses practically all of the Puranas, other than the extent to which they themselves put a focus on Srimad Bhagavatam. So this Purana is for the mode of passion. This one's for people in the mode of ignorance. What does that have to do with us? What does that have to do? He's pointing out the relativity of the whole body of knowledge, while at the same time speaking about its absoluteness, if you will. It's very interesting. We kind of tend to take the absoluteness. Here it is. Here's the work of Vyasa. All knowledge is found there. We dismiss anything else from anywhere else. This is an excuse for not having a spiritual worldview and practice that has intellectual integrity, and that's a problem. Because the scripture is there, not in Vyasa's work, not to allow us to stop thinking, but to make us think more than we ever have before. Give me something to really think deeply about, and how to apply that knowledge to arrive at the perfect knowledge that, again, his work is said to contain. And that is about you and your potential. So the book is there to tax us. The texts are very much to tax us intellectually, physically, mentally, but not to give us a get out of jail free ticket that you don't have to think anymore. So yes, all knowledge is there in the work of Vyas, but we need a big footnote for that, which I'm writing here as we speak. And of course, as we come, speak about Vyas, we're speaking about a succession as well, right? The literature is there, the text is there, and you've written it down. Anybody can make it up as they go along, if you will, but if they write it down, you can find, did you contradict yourself over here? Or is it what you're teaching? Does it have it? Is it coherent? Is it consistent? Well, if you write it down, then we can catch you and we can see, well, you said this over here, you said that over there, and so forth. So write it all down, and then that becomes a standard body of knowledge. It's kind of like a map. And then the successive acharyas, teachers, the successive Vyasas, if you will, who continue to articulate, comment upon, write about, extend, and explore the significance of the text. That's a very interesting point in itself, because it's often thought that, well, religion is like, there it is, it's all said and done, and you have to believe this set of facts, whereas in science, there's always new insights. We're always open to new ways of looking at it as we find new things. That is not an accurate depiction of either side, for that matter. The openness of the scientist is questionable in an absolute sense, for sure. He may wear a white coat, but he or she's a human at the same time. And with regard to, this is a good example, the religious side, for centuries and centuries and centuries, plumbing the depths of the implications of the contributions of Vyasa, and particularly the Bhagavatam, for that matter, which is, of course, where Jiva Goswami arrives at in his Pramana-khanda. Here is the perfect form of Vyasa's writing that can be fully taken advantage of in our age. And as I want to say, Jiva Goswami did this in his time, in the disciplic succession of successive acharyas who continue to elaborate upon expand upon, shed light on the significance of the core texts, we come to, of course, our Paribar, Bhakti Vinod Paribar, and its contribution, and the fact that Bhakti Vinod Thakur interfaced with modern insights from outside of India, the modern world, and so forth. And there he met with the challenge of the very idea that we're talking about, a traditional idea that there's a person named Vyasa, he lives in the Himalaya, he's still there, and his books contain all knowledge and so forth. And so, as you know, with modern systems of history and dating and so forth, the texts are looked at differently. Bhagavatam is looked at from an academic point of view, perhaps as being written maybe in the 4th or 6th century, perhaps from South India or something like that. Of course, these are not, these are conjectures, speculations. They cast some doubt on the traditional perspective, but they're not something that's, they don't disprove it necessarily. But Bhakti Vinod Thakur, in a kind of a Shastra Nipun, moment, if you will, just a kind of a scriptural genius, if you will, he just said, well, it doesn't really matter. It's what the book says. I mean, that's like, duh, it's kind of like, but it's like, yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Like Jiva Goswami says in Tattva Sandarbha, well, if you want to understand the Bhagavatam, why don't we understand what Vyasa experienced in his trance? Which is what the Bhagavatam came out of, like, duh. Yeah, but nobody thought about that before. So these are the kind of like, this is what I call Shastra Nipun, not just, Shastra Nipun means like a scriptural genius. It doesn't mean just he's memorized so many verses. You get these guys who can memorize the whole Mahabharata, and then and recite it. They just have fantastic memories. They're good people and whatnot. But that's not what we mean by Shastra Nipun. To come up with these kind of insightful statements that are the kind of common sense, if you will, that's so uncommon. And our Paribar in particular, and this is an important point, is characterized by strong common sense. So much lacking in the devotee community in the Paribar of Bhakti Vinod today, unfortunately. But this is an example of his common sense. Well, it doesn't really make any difference. That could be, this could be. It could be that somebody named Vyas thousands of years ago wrote it all down. It could be that it was written over centuries, but who wrote it? Who knows? But what does it say? What does it say? And you can make a whole modern argument as to the importance, the significance of Srimad Bhagavatam in comparison to any other book of revelation from other traditions. Just, for example, look at its language, if you in India, where people are acquainted with it, of course, out of all the sacred texts, Srimad Bhagavatam has, other than maybe the Gita, has been, along with Ramayana, which is kind of the Ram Bhakti, parallel to the Krishna Bhakti Srimad Bhagavatam. Bhagavatam is just widely popular. Charming stories of Krishna. It's from a literary point of view, its language is much more sophisticated. From a theological point of view, it much more complex than the Quran or the Bible. I mean, really, you could make a very strong, an article should be written or a book, redoing kind of the Pramana Kanda of the Tattva Sandarbha as to why Srimad Bhagavatam should be given the kind of emphasis that we in our tradition today give it. Ultimately, of course, what you find in the Bhagavatam is a discussion about the nature of the Godhead that is such that it enables us to bond with him through our all of our human emotions. You can't find that anywhere. It's very incredible. That means to say that just the reading of the Bhagavatam's depiction of Krishna Lila, the Prakat Lila, it touches all of our human emotions. When we read the Lila and we hear Krishna stole butter and he was mischievous because, well, we know by our own experience that the forbidden fruits taste better, or at least we humans think they do. We have a side towards that. So when we find that the Absolute is being depicted in this way, for example, we bond with him at that moment. When he, whether it be, it's the Bhagavatam's description of Vatsalya Rasa or Sakya Rasa or Madhurya Rasa. We're humans. We have experience of these things, materially speaking. So when we hear a description of the Absolute that's like us, without thinking about it, just emotionally, that moment catches us in the discussion of the Leela. Oh, yes, and Krishna did that. I know, I've done that. I've thought like that. I'm like that. He's like us. This is the very seed of prem. Prem is, in one sense, characterized by mineness. He's mine. He's ours. He's like us. The Absolute is not a distant person, but he's just like us, but perfect. This is the real contribution of the Bhagavatam. Nigamako bataro galitam phalam. It is the ripened fruit of the tree of Vedic wisdom. Yes, so many forms of knowledge are there, ultimately knowledge about the Atma, but as I kept saying, knowledge about its potential as well. And this is understood in relation to the descent of bhakti that Bhagavatam is really all about. Study carefully, we understand Nard told Vyas, you got to do justice to what bhakti is in one text alone. And the implication is that will replace the need for all others. It's like a New Testament. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur in our Paribar, he said, well, it doesn't matter if it's old or it's new or whenever, it's what it says. And what does it say? I'm speaking a little bit about that. And this is the kind of thinking, if you will, that we should try to embrace as exemplified by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Essential thinking, very strong spiritual common sense, such that our spiritual pursuit has intellectual integrity. We may not be able to convince people to take it up on the basis of intellectual arguments alone, but that was never thought to be the case. And if they did by intellectual arguments alone, well, they still have to go further and really emotionally apply themselves, if you will, willfully apply themselves to understand it. But it's a very well thought out tradition that we're part of, and in particularly so, this is the case with the Parivar of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So I am very proud to be a humble member of the Bhaktivinoda Parivar, and to, by the grace of our Parivar and my Guru Maharaj's, be able to continue to speak about and write about the Eastern revelation. Prabhupada wrote that the first business of an acharya is to make a literary contribution. I think in a broader sense, he was referring to the idea of different acharyas making a literary contribution in the form of a commentary on Vedanta Sutra. We don't have to do that because, of course, we have the work of the Govinda Bhashya of Baladev Vidyabhushan, but more than that, as he himself says, we have Srimad Bhagavatam, as Mahaprabhu said, and as other sacred texts say, Srimad Bhagavatam is a natural commentary on the sutras. So this is the core text of the Gaudiyas, and for centuries now, Gaudiya has been pulling things out of the Bhagavatam that you wouldn't know were there. And so I am humbled by having the service of continuing to do that, and it's apparently it's been helpful to some people, and those of you who are gathered here. My own experience of the Bhagavatam, speak a little bit about myself on this day, began in Los Angeles. I joined the mission of Prabhupada in Santa Cruz in the mountains, and then after from a traveling Sankirtan party that was there. And when Prabhupada came to Los Angeles a couple months later, then we went to Los Angeles, and then I was initiated. And there, at that time, we had chapters of the Bhagavatam that had been published, like pamphlets, and classes were being given from the Bhagavatam. It was very exciting to me. What would happen next? What would happen next? I would live for the next, all day long. I would contemplate what happened that day in the Bhagavatam, and then start to think what will happen the next day. So I was very attentive for the classes, and I was fortunate in those days. For example, when I came to Los Angeles, Prabhupada named it New Dwarka. I had many deep experiences there with Prabhupada, because I spent the longest periods of time with Prabhupada there, where he would come. As I say, I was fortunate to spend 3 months about 3 months, I think, in the spring, and then again in the winter he would come. That went on for a couple of years before I began to travel and took sannyas. So at which time I would have opportunity to associate with Prabhupada more in different places and whatnot, but there in a concentrated way, I would hear his Bhagavatam classes every day. Someone had asked Indra from over in, I think she's in Austria, the musician, I think she's been publishing some photos of me and Prabhupada on the Sri Chaitanya Sangha Facebook site, and had asked if through Padmanabh Maharaj, if I could speak about the photos and what was going on in those photos. I would know how to do that, give you the photo and talk about it. But among photos of myself with Prabhupada, the one that stands out to me the most is relative to the discussion, is how I would plant my feet next to him as he sat on the Vyasasana and gave the Bhagavatam class, and I would stand through the whole class to make sure I didn't fall asleep. We didn't sleep much in those days, and we're very active at the same time. But I was standing right next to his right ear, and there's a beautiful picture of me singing into his ear. There, I don't know if it captures the moment, but it is exactly what the moment was like when Prabhupada asked me to lead kirtan. There, after the Bhagavatam class, there used to be a short kirtan, and during one of his visits, then, well, usually there would be sannyasis and leading administrators and so forth in the congregation, and there'd be a little bit of a jostle who would lead the kirtan. I think it was between Sudama and Guru Kripa Maharajas at the time, and it was, it just took a couple seconds and so forth. But Prabhupada noticed it, and then he turned and said, "Let this boy sing." And that morning I had been singing into Prabhupada's ear when he chanted, as he did before the Bhagavatam, Jai Radha Madhava, and I thought, he really knows what this song means, what this song means to him. That's what I want to enter into. But the way for me to do that is to sing it purely from my heart for his pleasure. It gives him pleasure, the song. So we have no other motive but to sing it for his pleasure. And when I was doing that, thinking that and singing in response to his chanting, he looked at me, gazed at me with this penetrating glance. And then as this jostling came after the class, when the kirtan was started, he said, let this boy sing. So I was quite surprised, so was everybody else, but I led the kirtan. I'm not really known for being a kirtaneer per se. And then the next morning, the same thing happened, and Prabhupada did the same thing. He said, let this boy sing. So that there's a picture of that kind of represents that moment of me singing into Prabhupada's ear at his Vyasa-san. And this in relation to the Bhagavatam class. Another similar occasion comes to mind there in Los Angeles where, again, Prabhupada would sing Jai Radha Madhava before the class, and I was standing just in front of the Vyasa-san, and I was doing this dance, and there was this thing we used to call the Swami step. Prabhupada showed one time how to dance. So I want to be authorized and in the Guru Parampara. So I thought, we're going to dance. You got to dance just like Prabhupada. So that was my thought. And I thought, I'm just going to dance, for his pleasure as he sings. And then next time Prabhupada returned to Los Angeles, I think it was Nanda Kumar, who was his assistant. He told me a story. He said, oh, and that boy Tripura, he dances very nicely. So things didn't go unnoticed by him, and things don't go unnoticed by me either. I'm part of all of you, so you should be careful. And I'm very happy to be with all of you and be able to be a significant influence in your life in terms of your interest in taking advantage of this whole idea of revelation. The idea that there's a perfect way of knowing that by which we can arrive at perfect knowledge and know ourself and our potential to the fullest extent. For me, of course, I'm speaking a little bit about it. I know what it means to have a guru, and it's not something that I could possibly do without or compare to anything else in my life, and especially as I'm thinking of those early days in Los Angeles when Prabhupada spent so much time there. I learned so much from his presence. I learned what love and separation meant, how it feels. It was very startling to me to hear one day that Prabhupada would be leaving in a couple of days. I just couldn't fathom the idea, and was overwhelmed with ecstasy in my lamentation, if you will. And things like this, I could understand. This is what love and separation means. That's what they're talking about. So many experiences I was blessed with there in very formative days of my life. I should go sometime to Los Angeles. They would allow me to just give a lecture and just talk about all the moments, what happened to me here and there, what the deity said to me here. And he also said, he said, well, watch me dance, Jagannath. So anyway, as I say, I know what it's like to have a guru, and so I know that a day like this, when we think about the appearance of the guru in our life, is important to all of you. I don't think of myself in the way that you do, but I understand that I fill a certain role there by the grace of Prabhupada, by the direction of Pujyapada Sridhar Maharaj asked me to start a mission and extend, as he told me, the work of Prabhupada in canvassing. And I did a lot of canvassing. I was speaking this morning about that with some of the devotees here, and I have been very, very, very active, extremely active for a long time. Some of you are meeting me now. I'm a little less active. I declared a few years ago that I was semi-retired. Um, and there's a lot of good reasons for that, but I'm happy to be available as I am now. Of course, I'm restricted further by the pandemic and so forth. I do hope to meet all of you personally that are on the Zoom classes who have joined our Sangha and began to listen to me and are here today, but have never had the chance to meet with me. So I hope to meet with you all at some point. But I think that for our mission, it's good for me to be in the position that I'm in, and the pandemic has helped in that regard as well, giving me time to concentrate on things, and the help of others now. Padmanabhar's arranged, for example, you're all able to hear a class every day from different speakers. I think every day of the week, isn't it? So that's very good. But at any rate, I'm humbled by the opportunity to serve you in this capacity, and I reflect upon the importance of it, the significance of it, the fact that people are thinking about me somewhere every hour of the day. Someone is thinking about me whom I've touched and who is depending upon me to be what the kind of a guy that they're looking for in life, that's described in texts that we're talking about, the text of Vyas. So that doesn't go, I want to say, unnoticed by me. I think about that. So it's by your grace then, that I'm put in a position to have to be very focused in my my practice. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur spoke about this himself on his famous address on the occasion of his appearance day, which was celebrated by his disciples. And at that time, he referred to his disciples as those who were sent as gurus to him by Bhakti Vinod, extension of Bhakti Vinod in his life. One of the prominent gurus, Gaur Kishore and Bhakti Vinod Thakur, in the life of Bhaktisiddhanta. He said, Bhakti Vinod has extended himself in the form of all of you to come and keep me engaged. You need one of me to keep you engaged. I need all of you to keep me engaged. So I'm quite needy in comparison. So be kind to me, and continue to bother me. Watch out for me, and pay attention to me. That's in my my interest, and I appreciate it very much. You're all a big help to me, and I'm humbled that I can be helpful to you. So those are some thoughts on a day that's interesting and rich, but a little awkward to speak about myself as much as you may want me to talk about myself. I did a little bit, but it's not my favorite subject. So does anyone have anything else they'd like to say? Any comments or questions? I'd be happy to entertain them.
Pranita has a question.
Okay.
So can you share if you have any thoughts about what you're working on in terms of writing next?
Well, I have a lot of different thoughts, and I can't say I've settled on anything in particular, but I have thoughts like writing a book. That one thought is to, I've written about the Aprakat Leela of Krishna from a Sakyarasa perspective, as the Leelas are portrayed in the Bhagavatam and commented upon. I thought of extending that to do the whole Braj Leela from the birth of Krishna till his departure to Mathura. I've thought about writing a book that is the essence of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which is an essay on each of the chapters of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. As I thought about it, the book, writing an essay on each chapter of the Gita, I thought about it, each chapter of the Bhagavatam, or each canto of the Bhagavatam, a summary chapter. It's my ideas in this summary is not just like, condensing down what's said there, but writing down what's said there and then thinking about it and theologizing about it and so forth. So those are some of my recent ideas. I'm also interested in I gave a series of lectures in North Carolina some years back on Rupa Goswami's Namastakam. So I'm thinking of doing a book on a commentary on that. If I had those, I'd look at those lectures or listen to them and see where I went with that, and then write about it, write a book on it. 8 verses glorifying the holy name by Rupa Goswami. That's a shorter, smaller, digestible idea. Something like Shikshastakam, probably be a little shorter. And in my mind, I'll probably shift more towards something shorter after this big undertaking recently. The other books I just mentioned, they're also pretty big undertakings. So also that here, Gurnishta and Rinaranya are helping me to take the Darshan Press to like another level. And we had to unplug from other things to do that. It's quite a bit to live here at Audarya and have a dairy and keep the place up and so forth. And so we've had to move away from certain things that could be done here if there was a larger group of people here, which doesn't work for different reasons. And actually today we stopped the commercial dairy. This was the last day. Yesterday was the last day. Yesterday was the last day. Today's the last day. So we're going to be having a meeting about the Darshan Press and what we're going to, try to accomplish in the immediate. In the immediate, there's some catch-up work to do to put all of my books into Kindle format and republish some that are out of print now. Probably we'll do some limited edition hardbacks of each of the books that are out of print, as well as have them available print on demand and paperback on and stores like Amazon and so forth. Gurnishta is very keen on, he has a number of ideas to draw from my lectures and put into books, smaller books focusing on certain points that I've made. So that's going to be a whole different type of book that should be very interesting. I'm very enthusiastic about that. Those are just a few thoughts, but I appreciate your interest in the subject. What else? What other service can I render? Yes. Yes, I can.
Maharaj? Haribol?
Hare
So,
Krishna.
I
Hare
don't
Krishna,
know.
Maharaj. But I think Gaur Narayan had actually another question more related to the Bhagavatam. He's asking, I remember you mentioned writing summaries of the Bhagavatam. Are you still considering that? And then I have a question too.
I just mentioned that in my response to Pranava. So it's still something on my mind. It would be a valuable contribution. The Bhagavatam, which we talked about, today is of course a very big text, and it's very complex, difficult for the average person to enter into and really figure out what's going on there, you know. So it would be a valuable contribution, but yeah, it's still on my mind.
Hare Krishna, and my question is, so when you saw these photos, how did you feel? What went through your head?
Well, a lot of things. One of the things that goes through my mind when I see those photos is the other devotees who are present there, and how they're at their best, if you will, how Prabhupada is drawing out their serving ego. And that's how I like to think of them. I like to remember them in those times and how they were so focused. And so some of them are not as focused at present, would be the contrast. A lot of them, unfortunately. And I understand the reasons why. I don't necessarily fault them, but I look at that and then I feel very close to almost all of them, almost all of them, and how they were giving themselves, contributing, and so forth. And I feel happy to be amongst them. Those were very special times in the history of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, to be sure. Prabhupada is a very interesting person in terms of his ability to generate enthusiasm, dedication, his affection, and so forth, with at the same time having a kind of a no-nonsense attitude. He made his literary contribution, of course, which is significant, but even Sridhar Maharaj remarked his power to draw such dedication from so many people was uncommon. So you see that in those I know what people are thinking in those pictures, or for the most part, what was happening. Where I was in Mayapur, Vrindavan, some of the pictures. Going on a walk in the morning with Prabhupada through the fields, the rice fields, and in Mayapur. I can reflect on the prominent topics, and so forth. So they really kind of transport me into those moments themselves, and they're like like a psychedelic flashback or something, if you will. They're udipana for the ecstasy of those moments. So they're nectar for the eyes. Thank you for posting that.
Jai, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Yes.
This was my Guru Maharaj. This was my most favorite talk ever.
Well, thank you for your recent gift. I just needed a new bead bag. This was perfect timing.
Good.
Much appreciated. Together, gift items and your kind words. I always remember you from the time I came to New York. I was invited there from Los Angeles to talk about or exemplify book distribution, to be met with by Budi Manta and Jadharani, Daya Shakti, and yourself, as the competitors, as if Brooklyn was to say, well, we'll see about this guy in Los Angeles, how good of a book distributor he. That's how Gaur Hari kind of greeted me as the door as I came into the Brooklyn Temple. But I'm pretty observant type of a person, and it was you and Jiva and Daiva Shakti, who I singled out as being, these people are really, they're special, these two. And then you in particular, I remember one of the days, I don't know, we were skipping between distributing books at Port Authority and this airport and that, and I saw you in like it was LaGuardia, and I thought she's really, I followed your career after that as whenever I could. So very happy to be connected with you and be able to help you and your family, and your son, and so forth. It means a lot to me. So
You mean a lot to me. Thank
okay.
you.
Just want to just say one thing, that everyone needs to have their English and mute original audio, because Mahara wasn't hearing Padmanabha Swami, and so people have been cutting other people off. So please do that, because this is what happens when we don't. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so can we hear from Padmanabh Maharsh? Agni Puran has a question. Okay. I think that I don't think per se that the worship is a problem in one sense. Let's say, for example, the offering of arati, it's a ritual in India that is not that uncommon. Even Sri Ram's mother will offer arti to him in the Leela, for example. Of course, you know, that said, it's odd in the Western world and looks over the top. I mean, bowing down and touching your head on the floor looks over the top. And perhaps it can go to the head of somebody who has others bowing down to them, whether they're from the East or the West, I suppose. So, I mean, I'm just kind of thinking about your question, and well, Prabhupada was a very practical person, and he was concerned with sharing the teaching with the public, and if there were things that were barriers to that, he would adjust accordingly. The standard of his own worship, the way in which we worshiped him, which was pretty extreme in one sense, was something that just kind of happened, and it seemed to be working, so he went along with it. When Sridhar Maharaj heard that Prabhupada was being offered arti every day, he said, every day? And the devotees are enthused by it. Oh, okay. So he looked at it like that. I mentioned, referenced earlier, the Vyasa Puja celebration of Bhaktisiddhanta, where he considered his disciples to be his representatives of his guru, engaging him. And he was sitting on a big seat, and his talk, his famous talk on the day, is called More Humble Than a Blade of Grass, because he was not, didn't look humble, but there he was, sitting up on a seat above everybody else. So he's explaining that even then. And I think that was a little bit maybe out of character for the previous norms, even within Gaudiya Vaishnavism, where the sadhus and the gurus, if we look, for example, at Jaiva Dharma of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, we get some idea of how the great sadhus of the time conducted themselves and were interacted with, by the public and their students. And you get a very charming, intimate kind of picture there that is lacking in Aishvarya. But Prabhupada employed Aishvarya of the West in Krishna consciousness, and it seemed to work. So he went with that. But there's plenty of room to think about it differently, and especially in light of what you bring up as well. For myself, I think that it's important that the students don't misunderstand who I am, what I have, and I have to look to see that and create some distance, because familiarity breeds contempt. So it's be different with different persons, but the way in which I tend to do that is through my writing, through my speaking. I think my friends and students can see there's a difference between us and him, and it's good. And that, they don't need anything more than that, so to speak. That's what, in a healthy way, one in my position needs to create, because a fire is such that you can't get too close to it or you get burned. But if you can't stay too far away from it, or you won't get warm and you won't be able to cook. So you have to make this kind of, in an ongoing way, and it will be different with different students. This kind of measurement, and if it's simply done by way of Aishvarya and elaborate worship and so on and so forth, that can be a problem in, I suppose, more ways than one. The guru should be able to create that without that, and Prabhupada was able to create that without that. But then we had opulence compared to India, materially speaking, to then use in his service and so forth. So at any rate, I think that, and there was a time also when there wasn't a Guru Puja for Prabhupada every day. I remember when we started, we were on a walk with Prabhupada in Calcutta, and one of his disciples said, "I heard that we could offer artik to the Guru." And Prabhupada said, "Yes, of course," something like that. And so then he ran back. They had it all planned. Ran back and they set up an artik for Prabhupada to be performed when he came back from his walk and sat on the Vyasasan. And Prabhupada accepted it. It was heartfelt. And then it was like sent all over the world. Prabhupada just accepting artik. And so then the artik started for Prabhupada, all over the world, before the Bhagavatam class. Is it essential? No. It's like the story of the cat. The cat was brought. Guru sat down to give a talk on the Bhagavatam, and a cat started meowing. He said, "Give the cat some milk, and tie the cat up and give her some milk and let her sit for the Bhagavatam class." So the cat came the next day, same thing next day, went on for years. Guru passed away, then the cat passed away. And then when the next guru carried on and the cat passed away, so, well, we can't get the Bhagavatam class unless we get another cat. And we have to have a cat tied up, giving cat milk before he can speak the Bhagavatam. So think a lot of things are details; they're not necessary. But I'm speaking about, if you follow me here in principle, there needs to be some regard for the knowledge and the example of devotion for us to take advantage of it. Some distance has to be created. The guru, he or she, should be able to do that by their own character and person, and be thoughtful. He or she should, in light of where they are and how that will play out in the minds of the culture in which bhakti is being transplanted, if you will. So I would I want to say it's one thing about how the public might respond to something that's fully understood by devotees, and it's another thing how devotees might think, and that seems to be part of your question, in light of things that have happened in terms of the institution of the gurus failing to live up to their expectations and so forth, and persons having worshipped them, and then maybe they're thinking the worship was why they fell down or something. I don't think that's the case, but you have a license to be thoughtful about it. I would look more towards the model that you find in, that's what I gravitate towards, in Jaiva Dharma, for example, where there's all regard, but it's very, very charming and intimate type of a setting. I think that would be something that would be appreciated by the public. I think it is a type of standard that that devotees could relate to as well in light of the problems that you refer to. So those are some thoughts. I hope that helps.
Okay, Panchatattva said he had a question in the chat.
Personally, I'm not someone to have my feet bathed with yogurt and ghee and, garlands up to my head. If you know me, that doesn't work for me at all. So I suppose my own example is setting a standard of what I think about that and how that should be conducted. So hopefully I'll get to spend some time with you, Kriparam, and you'll see me in action in that regard. I'm sorry, go ahead, Arjun City.
Yeah, Panchatattva said he has a question, if there's time.
Okay, go ahead.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, happy birthday.
Can't hear you. Can't hear what you're saying.
Gauranga.
Can't hear. Arjun City, what does he have to do so that I can hear him?
Panchatattva, do you have your little globe? Did you click on English and mute original audio? Did you do
No
that?
globe. No globe.
On the screen, on the Zoom, on the far right, there's a little sign in red that says leave. And to the left of that, there's a little circle under it that says English. If you click on that,
Probably doesn't say English because he hasn't clicked on it yet, but it's a translator globe.
it says EN, or well, anyways, what does it say?
Well, it's just a translator globe until he clicks on it. But I don't know if he can. No.
There's
Okay.
nothing there.
Not going to happen today.
Not gonna happen.
No. Okay.
Oh, well.
Anybody else have a question they'd like to ask?
I have a question.
Okay.
Haribol, Guru
See.
Maharaj. I have a question. Have you ever had Guru Maharaj any doubts, about Srila Prabhupada at the beginning of the movement? And if you
We can't
had
hear
any doubts,
Alex. He's
Are-
not coming. We're not hearing him.
Raphael,
yes, Ramagovinda.
he's speaking, but we can't hear him. We can't hear you.
Can't
You can't
Same
hear
problem.
me. Okay.
I got it, I think. Can you hear me, Maharaj?
Yes, now we can hear Panchatattva.
Okay. So gets to ask his
Haribol.
question.
Go ahead.
Happy birthday, Maharaj.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you about this concept of that I came across. It's referred to as Paribhas Sutra of Krishna Lila, and I've heard you mention it before, but not too much at length. And I'm wondering, this specific one that's mentioned here in Bhagavatam by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is in reference to Mother Yashoda, and when she's looking into Krishna's mouth and seeing the universal form, and she decides that's fine and dandy, but she prefers to have Krishna as a little boy. And this particular verse, according to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, is one of the fundamental building blocks, I think, as you state. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, if there was more, if there are more, what they are.
Well, yeah, it's a little bit, it's a good question. It's a little bit off topic. So I'm gonna answer, given the
I know.
day, what's on other people's minds, but you
I
know,
know it's off topic.
briefly, the idea is that, you know, certain verses are key to certain aspects of the philosophy, and like Krishna's Tu Bhagavan Swayam, that's a key to, you know, the fact that Krishna is the source of Narayan, and from an aesthetic point of view, he's the more complete form of the absolute. The verse you're referring to is about Mother Yasoda's praying, and it's in relation to Bhakti Rasa. Certain key verses, that's all it means, certain key verses that are very powerful and constitute something that's expounded upon, you know, at greater length. They're in a condensed form regarding different aspects of the teaching. Like you have the Chatur Sloki of the Bhagavatam, the Chatur Sloki of the Gita. Vishwanath seems to be, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, fond of finding them and designated them as such. I think it was he who designated these 4 verses of the Gita are the, you know, essence, and so kind of like PowerPoints of the text with regard to different aspects of the teaching is the basic concept. Let's leave it at that for the moment. Another question?
Hello.
Okay. Por favor, acepte mis humildades reverencias. I think we all understand that. Todas las glorias de Srila Prabhupada. Got that one. Quiere pregunta si en algún momento. Yes. Yeah. Well, I don't think of it quite like that. I don't think I had that experience. But when I first read the book Sri Guru and His Grace, I felt that that I had the experience that that I was in touch with someone who could move me and turn my head, so to speak, in the same measure that Prabhupada could. And I had never met anybody like that before. And so I could understand immediately that this is, these two are on the same page. They have the same background. They're 2 leaves from the same tree, although they're appearing at distant places and time. They're from the same tree, and so I wept at that moment, and it was a time when unfortunately representation of Prabhupada was lacking, both in terms of character and in terms of knowledge and actual bhakti, which was disconcerting. I was always interested in following the leaders, doing the right thing and so forth. I may seem like a very independent person, but I am in some respects, but I'm independent, and I'm not going to be harnessed by anybody but the person who really deserves to or not deserves, but who has that kind of power that really naturally draws that kind of dedication out of me. So that's a way in which I made a connection. Prabhupada is speaking to me through Sridhar Maharaj, I guess you could say. Here he is again, I thought. That which is essentially Prabhupada, in a different form, speaking to me with the same measure of with the same ability to compel me, and so forth. So that's a moment I think that I can kind of say yes and talk about it in terms of your question. Does that help? Okay.
Raphael has been trying to ask his question, but I don't know if we'll be able to hear him. Let's try one more time, Raphael.
Now?
Unmute.
Seems
Yes,
that
unmute
he's
himself.
muted. On my screen, his microphone has there. Okay.
Can you hear me?
See.
Yes. See.
Good. I have a question. Guru Maharaj, have you ever had any doubts, in about Srila Prabhupada in early stage when you joined to the movement and it was big boom, everyone singing Hare Krishna. Have you ever thought that is this the right lineage, in terms of the parampara? If I have a right taste to Srila Prabhupada, maybe there are other gurus in that time, joined to the different spiritual practice. I'm talking only inclusive in bhakti yoga, and so if yes, what was that, and how Guru Maharaj solved this problem in that time? Because I presume the taste to Guru is developing over the time, and there's a time that we are more stable, there's a time that we have a doubt, thoughts, So what was that exactly? And if that happened, could you, Guru Maharaj, explain us,
Well, in the beginning, of course, I didn't have any other experience of any other guru figure than Prabhupada,
Okay.
in the case for most of us. And so we were drawn to him, and we accepted him without question. And then by applying ourselves according to his teachings, at least for myself, I got a deep experience which confirmed his in my life, that I had connected with a person who could deliver me from a material existence and more. So I would say that that which prevented doubts from arising was the experience that I derived from following his instructions, and I followed pretty strictly and practiced very diligently, and so I got results. I got the experience. You may remember yourself that our mutual friend and my disciple Gokul Chandra was living here with me at Audarya, and at one point he wrote to you and said, "It's real here," something to that effect. He was getting some experience from deep immersion in practice. He was realizing this isn't just a theory. There is really something here. So the experience is very confirming. But of course, to get the experience, we have to get out of our head, so to speak, and use our head to soften our heart and really apply ourselves deeply and consistently. And our conditioning doesn't always allow us to do that. There are things that get in the way, and we may not always be in good association given our circumstances. So there are a lot of distractions. So it's a struggle. So there's a good reason for devotees may have doubts, lacking experience. I think experience is the ultimate pramana, evidence that I'm on the right course here. So I got deep experience, and today we were talking about even looking at the pictures. I can remember, the ecstasy of the moment and so forth in the past and so forth. Not to say that I don't have experiences now, but those early experiences were very confirming. And add to that, there was no one else to consider. We didn't have any connection with any other gurus. Now, after Prabhupada left, then we enter into a different chapter. When he's not personally present, he's being misrepresented to some extent and to a large extent. and we need to go on, and someone else comes into, other figures come into the picture as possible representatives. They misrepresented within the movement, problem, and then exposure to figures outside of the ISKCON movement became a reality. And then, so for example, Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj, his example. Now his example caused some doubts to arise in me about Prabhupada, not about Prabhupada's spirituality. I had no doubt about that, because with the mantras I received from him, they work, so to speak, to put it like that. I get the experience. But I had doubts about the extent to which everything he wrote, everything he said was absolute in all respects. I realized there were other ways to think about it. I started to be able to think about why he said things at certain times and in certain circumstances, and how they were relative, and so on and so forth. So I started to really actually mature my understanding of Prabhupada by strengthening, so to speak, my heart with my head. But when you do that, the head is a doubting factor or facility, enterprise. So it doubts, it questions. So I began to question in ways that I hadn't previously. And then I learned also about challenges to our sampradaya and our paribar, I should say, from other paribars as to the authenticity of the whole lineage. Bhakti Siddhanta, some people don't accept his innovations and so on. I became exposed to all of that. So that gave me pause to think about issues that I hadn't thought about previously, and see ways in which Prabhupada might be misunderstood, and so forth, how he could have said it otherwise and it might have been better. And I started to understand other people's doubts, and I understood the validity of their doubts. I understood why their doubts were reasonable. Previously, I might have just dismissed them if I heard somebody doubts Prabhupada. I could understand why they might have, from their vantage point, but they didn't have my experience along with it. So my experience was always the gravity, so to speak, the grounding that enabled me to enter into controversial topics like this, where find answers, ways to answer and clear doubts about Prabhupada that arose in others, and so forth. So there was a doubting kind of a function, if you will. But what I'm saying to you is I love Prabhupada, because I knew that Prabhupada loved me. And so I'm anchored to that, if you will. There are ways in which he's written in his books. He was traveling all over the world, answering letters, managing a mission, and writing books at night, And when you write like that, they're going to be, and your editors just go, yes, whatever you say, Prabhupada, put a comma here, then you don't get the kind of service from those persons, editors, that that enables you to improve the book to the extent that you might want. That's a big subject, and so some things show up here and there, and Prabhupada said this over here, and he said that over there. So that kind of thing comes up, and I was able to resolve all those things, as I say, and I have no doubts about his spirituality. I had some doubts about the way I was thinking about him, that have enabled me to think about him more deeply and have deeper appreciation that may appear to other people whose conviction and service to him is not as developed, not as well thought out. My way of thinking about it may appear to them to be heretical, even, or doubts in Prabhupada and so forth, but they have not gone through the exercise, I would say, of harmonizing the head with their their heart with their head. So those are some thoughts. Hope that helps. Good to see you. Where are you now? Are you in London?
Yeah, he-
Yes, I'm in London.
Okay. I hope to see you sometime soon. So what else? Maraj, Padmanabh, any question from Latin America? The word? The question seems to be, what is there something that Prabhupada said to me that most resonated with me? Is that the question? I don't think there's any particular thing that he said that particularly resonates, but the way in which he thought about me. I was kind of, I think I was interesting to him and curious, and kind of humorous in a way, to think that someone like me could become like was unexpected that I would be the way I was. Not that he necessarily thought it was unexpected, but I don't know how well I'm explaining myself, but I guess I just felt that Prabhupada liked me. You know, he liked me. He loved me, and he said as much in different ways at different times, and both, I think, one thing is for my service and whatnot, and another thing for my personality. It's not everybody's, even amongst gurus and disciples, like Pujapad Mars told me that some of his disciples, he didn't like their personalities. You know, they were jarring to him and so forth. His own disciple, he's just an honest admission. That means, doesn't mean he didn't love them, but he couldn't get as close to them, something like that. So there was something about my personality that I found that Prabhupada found it a little bit curious and interesting and a little bit humorous. I don't mean that I was funny, but but it was, you know, sometimes I would pay obeisance and he would kind of chuckle, you know, there he is, you know, like, I felt like I'd been around for, you know, a long time, not only this lifetime, and in all of my meetings with him in private, where there were several, he was, he didn't seem to have a problem with my personality, let's say. And I felt like that. So there was a bond on that level with him. But I can't think of anything in particular that he said. He said so many things. What else? I think the Prabhupada thought I was a good devotee. That's a really big compliment, a good devotee. You want to be a good devotee, not a great devotee. Try to be a good devotee. So many people are trying to be a great devotee. That's a problem. I'm very blessed in my life. I have no interest in Pratishta. That has never had any interest to me whatsoever. I find it comical that someone could be interested in that. It's such an empty, vacuous thing. Just to serve and do the right thing. That's my interest. I think Prabhupada could appreciate that. I was a link in a way between Prabhupada and the public. He used to ask me what people would say, what kind of arguments they would have against the philosophy, because I was always in touch with the public. A lot of his leaders were not in touch with the public as much. I was in touch with Prabhupada, I was in touch with the public, and I was in touch with the rank and file devotees. So I represented a kind of a unique kind of niche, if you will, and Prabhupada would draw upon that at times. So anyway, some thoughts. Any other questions or comments?
Thank you so much, Guru. I can just feel all the gratitude among all the devotees here for what you shared.
Sounds like, I can't see, but sounds like Braj Bhumi. To hear your voice. Okay, well, we've gone on a long time now, so we'll stop and tomorrow we'll meet again for Gaur Purnim, right? So Shri Bhakti Paribar ki jai, Shri Vyas Roy ki jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Gaur Premanande, Haribol.
His Divine Grace Bhaktivedanta Tripurari Swami Guru Maharaj Ki Jai.
And if everyone can stay on for just 1 minute after, so I'll make one more announcement. Sakirati, can you hear me? Can you unmute yourself and tell devotees what you're doing and maybe put a link in the chat?
Yeah, Haribol. So we have a studying group here in Europe with few devotees, and we decided to today talk about Guru Maharaj. And whoever want to join, we will just talk about Guru Maharaj. I will leave the link in description. If I found, oh, it's there. Bhakti
I
Shakti.
just pasted it.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Everyone is welcome.
So everyone needs to copy that link quickly because the call will be ending. And it's wonderful to have everybody on. And I need to turn off Facebook because I always forget to do that. Stop the recording. Okay, so we'll see.